Today we're working on my Gen-2 B58. We're installing a pure 600 turbo upgrade. It just came out, and I want to explain to you guys why I think it's one of the smartest moves you can make on one of these cars. So this turbo is designed for the 6-port Gen-2 B58, whether you have a X3, M240i, M340i, M440i, etc. This is for the Gen-2 B58. This is called the Pure 600. It's similar to the Hypercore. At the time of filming, this can be had for under $1,100. You're going to have a 54 millimeter wheel on the intake side versus a 50 millimeter wheel stock, and then the exhaust side is going to have a 50 just like stock, so it can fit into the stock exhaust housing. So this is going to be a really good value option. On paper this won't be impressive, but I'm going to tell you why in the real world it's a smart move. The good thing about this is there's no core return, it's complete casting. So you're kind of one and done when you order it, and you can revert it back to stock at a later time if you ever wanted to. Like I said, this is for the Gen-2 B58 with the 6-port head, and it does not fit the X7, X5, 540i, 740i, 840i, etc. with a 2-port from the factory. But they did put a small caveat that this can fit a 2020 Supra if you have a 2-port, but only exclusively for the 2020 Supra. But here's a hint of where I'm going to be going next. If you're new to my channel, this is a 330i, but it has a Gen-2 B58 from an 840i swapped into it. So you can see it's a 2-port. Why would someone buy this turbo when on paper it doesn't make much more than a stock turbo? It's not about what's on paper, it's about real world practice and the experience you can get. I started a members only section of the channel. I'm still catering to my core audience here. This video came out for everybody. My usual format, I'm just putting more out than I would have otherwise with memberships to try to make this whole channel viable financially. This is a 2021 locked DME from a 740i. And right now I'm holding it in my hands and it's unlocked. I did it at home. I can bench read it right on my desk at home. This will be in a tier 2 members only video. You probably already see it on the channel by the time this video comes out. And then I have a tier 1 where I do extended format, long format versions of the stuff that I condense down, or semi-niche content. And then you have the super niche content. An example of a semi-niche content video is going to be tier 1, but it's going to be going into all the part numbers and details to replicate the swap on your own car. Here's a hint of how I did the unlock at home. And before you get too excited, it's not going to be an alternative to Femto or anything like that. It's just going to be able to create a hardware unlocked computer that you could potentially clone to for cheaper than they go for out of an early B58 car. I don't think an M340i makes sense if you're trying to go for more than 600 wheel. You can make way beyond that. We all know that you could do 900, 1,000 wheel. If you left it at 800, it'll probably last a long time, stock bottom end on an M340i. But this chassis is too heavy to kind of set records, and you might as well just get an M240i or get a Supra if you're going to go push that platform. And it's very relevant on a Supra. On an M240i, it's kind of decent. Like, you're still throwing more money at it than if you had just started with an S58, because an S58, you just basically throw downpipe and a tune on it, and you're already at the point where it's insane speed. This thing at Redline is pushing maybe high 300s, low 400s with an off-the-shelf tune. Maybe we could push it to be just beyond 400 at Redline. Sure, it can make 500 wheel horsepower plus down low, but as soon as you get past 5,000 RPM, it's just going to fall off. It's going to be similar to trying to push stock turbos on an N54. It's fun, it's awesome, as long as you don't want to rev past 5. So I needed a solution, but I didn't want to give up the daily driving ability of this. So I was looking for something. I saw the Hypercore and I figured, will we do that? Or can we just kind of dial in lean spool and whatnot and just go to a dedicated stage 2 turbo? While I've been mulling that over, this thing came out. It feels like the perfect solution for me anyways. But I also feel like if you guys have one of these cars, you really shouldn't, from a cost perspective, start with this platform. The resale value on an M340i is really, really good because they're not depreciating. People love them. BMW really knocked it out of the park. They sold a ton of these. They're still selling them. So if you have an M340i specifically, a lot of you guys probably do at this point, I suggest that you stay under 600 wheel. You get to keep the stock low pressure fuel pump. You get to keep the stock high pressure fuel pump, your stock injectors. These cars are so popular because all you need is a downpipe, tune, run E40 if you want to make great power, and they're relatively reliable. But there comes a point where if you get beyond 500 wheel horsepower, if you're trying to go more, the rough part is there's so much potential there that you can go crazy, but you're spending too much money. This chassis is too heavy, and you don't want to have to build a transmission. You don't want to have to run flex fuel. You don't want to have to run port injection or upgraded fuel pump and all that just to get another 100 wheel maybe. And then once you push consistently beyond 750 wheel or so, Are you always going to be confident in it lasting? Sure, you kept the torque down on the transmission. Eventually, it will start to take its toll on a couple of the clutches, higher gears, etc. I just don't think that the M340i should be pushed beyond 600 wheel in terms of bang for your buck. Start with the G80 and just go from there. Your starting point is 700 plus wheel, and the sky's the limit at that point. You'll have to build a transmission eventually, etc. But I'm sure a lot of you guys just want to have 800-900 wheel all-wheel drive if you're going crazy for braking rates and all that. And then there's the people caught between saying, can I really justify going beyond a stock turbo? The stock turbo is still so punchy and it's such a good bang for your buck. Everybody tells M340i owners, chill out, calm down. You know, what's wrong with the stock turbo maxed out E40? It's the cheapest way to get crazy power. But you also have the people that have locked DMEs and they're looking for something to kind of scratch the itch beyond just JB4 and a downpipe. If you were to put this turbo on a locked 2022, 2021, etc. M340i, run JB4 and mix in some ethanol, I think you can make 500 wheel horsepower at redline, and it's not going to freak the transmission out. It will have a slightly shortened life expectancy. You have to be realistic versus getting your DME partial unlocked. But I think this could be the only turbo that isn't too aggressive where you could run it on a stock tune. This thing is actually designed to run on a bone stock tune. They're even saying it on Pure's website. You can put this turbo in, completely stock tune, and you would have more power at redline just because it's going to target a certain amount of boost and it's going to be able to hold that because it's not going to be blowing hot air because the compressor induction wheel is more efficient because it's slightly larger. On the exhaust side, you can still have that bottleneck of trying to ask for too much power, but with the stock exhaust manifold design and whatnot, you're probably not going to have that issue. Or it's even quoted as being compatible with MHD or any stage 2 tune with ethanol. This is not going to add maybe more than 50 wheel in terms of peak overall number. Where it's going to be amazing is if you wanted to get your tuner to push this to the max, in theory, it could go to 550 wheel horsepower near redline. What does that mean? It means if you had a stock turbo car that's making within 50 wheel horsepower of you, once you're past 5,000 RPM, especially third gear and beyond, you're going to have about another 150 wheel holding till redline. It's a whole different experience when a car pulls to redline. But with the same exact exhaust wheel, technically the spooling should be barely changed, which is awesome. I think that's just perfect because you know how hard you'll pull on someone with an extra 150 wheel. You know, you're freight training them at that point, but you have all the stock characteristics and benefits. So in my case, I'm going to get a custom tune from Racebox. Hussein and his team there, Alex, etc., are masters at this B58. They have a lot of experience. 600 crank horsepower at redline on an engine that could make 1,000 crank without braking. So it's going to be so under stressed. A transmission that's not going to be under stress in terms of torque while maxing the turbo out. Doesn't need to be built. Stock fuel system, stock everything. It's just literally the next evolution of downpipe tube stage 1 pure 600. Now, even the stock M340i, I lost the urge when I first got it to push it because I was surprised at how much the power fell off at redline. I was actually surprised by how little it pulled for a stock car, but otherwise it was awesome. I think this will just get around that for you guys as well. But let's talk about how this doesn't fit this engine technically. So I'm running my stock 330i airbox, and I had my silicone tube here that was just generic that I cut down to fit onto an 840i inlet. And the inlet's relatively small and it's a completely different design. I'll show you when I pull the turbo out. The moment I found out that you could fit this turbo onto a 2020 Supra, then I knew that, okay, order it, it's going to work. And I went on eBay and actually bought parts off of a 2020 Supra just to be safe, only to find that when you put the part numbers in, they're the exact same as an M340i would have come from the factory. So this is from a Supra, but this is the same exact part number I got to use that would come on M340i. When I was doing the swap, when I was preparing, I accidentally ordered the wrong size piece for here. I didn't realize that the inlet is only this big down there because it's a high velocity inlet for torque to push a big heavy SUV or big H series, etc. So I had the wrong size and I kept this. But now it's going to be perfect because this will fit the inlet. I went with a dyno inlet. This will fit here. So this is meant to fit over this. So 3.5 inches versus 4 inches. So it's 1/2 inch bigger down there. And that's why Pure says this turbo won't fit a 2-port. But this should be able to fit on any Gen 2 with what I'm going to do to this today anyway. So I'll have a link in the description for all these parts. But if you were to buy this, then If you have an 8 series, 7 series, 5 series, you would buy this tube. You would buy this inlet, which is a little bit bigger, or you could go with the pure high flow version of this, which I almost went for, but I decided against it because I'm just going for a mix of the two. You would buy this tube here. You would get this tube here that goes to the block for the PCV. You'll need this for the upper end for your air box. You'll need a clamp for it, and you're not going to have the right clip and seal for the inlet. So you have to get these. These are specifically from M340i or Supra. And you'll effectively convert your 2-port, regardless, even if you have an X5, to have compatibility with this turbo. It'll click together like OEM Plus, and the only issue is you may get a code for this, where you're going to get a code because the calibration is different on the PCB. Maybe your tuner can adjust the calibration or just delete the code for you. If you run an off-the-shelf tune, you probably would just get to your peak number that you target and not have that drop off. So if it's making 450, 460, 470 wheel because you have a healthy motor, it probably wouldn't drop to 400 wheel at Redline. It would just stay there and keep about 30 to 50 wheel with no changes. And then if you were to run the stock tune, it would have a similar effect where you just maintain power up high, probably 30, 50, 60 wheel max. And then overall peak numbers, people would laugh at you in a forum saying, why would you buy this turbo when you could have got the 650 or the 800 or the 900 or whatever? But that's not what I think makes sense because of all the supplemental mods that are needed downstream. With all that being said, you're going to have a larger compressor wheel here, so that naturally leads to you needing more boost to actually benefit from it. So that's where a custom tune will be required to really push it. If I make anywhere close to or beyond 500 wheel at Redline, I'll be happy. It may only do 510, 520, but it also could do 550. I don't want to push it to where this thing's blowing hot air either. So we'll probably just try to target where IETs look great. I don't need an intake manifold upgrade, and it's well over 500 wheel. That'll be a good spot to be. And it's the delta between stock turbo and this at high RPMs where it's all going to come together. I have the CSF charge air cooler upgrade, and I got auxiliary cooler upgrades because I didn't want to buy OEM ones to make the swap viable. But beyond that, consider it as if it's a stock M340i that just happens to make a little bit more torque because of compression. Nears makes no difference. The metrics for M340i guys, M240i guys, Supras is very similar. And now we should commence the DIY. This part is going to be the same if you have an M340i. It's just you're going to have your little resonator box kicking back that way. It pops out. You push down, get that out of the way for your math, and do your inlet. It'll be similar for stock. And then you're going to want to pull up on your air box. Watch out for the grommets on the bottom. They can drop. One grommet stayed on the air box. If that happens, pull it off your air box and put it back here. It goes out. Just undo the wastegate connector. And then the heater, PCV heater connector. Take this, move it out of the way. This is a different style, that's why it wouldn't work, and I had to order the parts. Take this out, pick tool. Move your inlet. This looks very different, as you can see. There's a size comparison. It's not going to be required to remove the charge pipe completely, just to move it back a bit so it has some wiggle room. T30s. Now this can pull away, which will aid in you being able to unclip it from the turbo. So this clip that holds the coolant hose, I just unclipped it for flexibility purposes. There we go. Goes down and out of the way. 13 mil for the downpipe clamp. This can just hang out back here. It has enough flex that it'll move out of the way. I think mine's extra flexible because this bracket here, I don't have that. I didn't bother getting it when I was doing the swap. So there's 2 bolts here that would normally restrict the downpipe from moving around. If you undid those, that should give you the flexibility to move it out like this. You're going to want to put a drain pan underneath to be able to catch coolant when you undo a couple coolant lines. Just an FYI, that grommet that I was talking about that could fall, it was on the floor for me. You have this clamp for support, T30. You have this here, oil feed line, T30. Best bet here is to insert the cloth so that when the oil runs down the block, you'll be prepared. I'm going to get this out of the way since I'm going to be changing it anyway. This is the PCV line to the block. Since I'm converting this out. So now we're removing the oil feed line. Here's your oil getting absorbed into the cloths. There is another T30. You have the coolant feed through the turbo and return. I suspect a decent amount of coolant is going to drop down. So you're going to want to be able to move your downpipe well out of the way because there's another T30. So we'll let that drain out, and then I will go after the front one. We have the oil drain line, same type of T30, going after that. It's done. I'm going to leave that on the car while I wait for that to drain. I'm going to get these released and just leave one to hold it. I have the coolant line up at the front now. I should be able to remove that without major spillage. Then there's a couple bolts at the bottom. You get a straight pick tool. Should be able to come in just like this. You can clip it. Before you lose the clip, recommend you snap it back. I'll show you when I get it out, but I'm removing two T45 bolts at the bottom of the turbo. You can see what I'm trying to get at. And once I remove this nut, we should be free to lift it out. Let that come down, get these gaskets away. We're not reusing. Now I'll prepare for the inlet conversion. Coming over here, squeezing here. It'll just be easier to do this off the car, so I'm taking this off for now. Unclip this, unclip here. Put that back over here. Out. We don't need this anymore. Let's get these lines removed. This you just rotate around to get clearance. Now we'll take out the wastegate. This will just lift up, rotate out of the way. T20s here. You have to squeeze this to be able to get it to pass through. To get the orientation right, I'm just gonna use this as a reference. So we have this, and it's roughly here. So about roughly halfway through here, it's gonna be our reference. Now we'll remove this, 10 mil. Well, let's go compare these before we move on. So the biggest change is the total length here. These are quite a bit longer, so they reach into the housing more. And overall, this diameter here is about the same. If anything, this is just slightly smaller at these points, but it doesn't have this piece to bridge it together. So within a millimeter, maybe the same or slightly smaller, but it reaches a lot further into the housing. So it almost makes you wonder if that may even be more spool happy. That's the part number, assuming some of you guys are inspired to try to fit this turbo on your 8 series or 5 series, etc. With this line here. This will feed here. This will feed here. This will go into the side of the inlet tube. 4 to 8 Newton meters thick. Okay, so I just got done making my thumbnail. You can see the size of this. So this is about 60, and then there's about 3 millimeters on each side, which would bring it to 54. You can see a very different style of inlet where it's all aluminum. So this is the opening that I had there. I have to subtract it, 54, and it tapers in. It only tapers in near the end, about halfway in, and it feels like it tapers in by like 1.5 millimeters over here. So each side, that would bring it down to about 50. So it's about 4 millimeters bigger. And then on the exhaust side, if anything, it's a tiny bit smaller, but then it extends further into the housing. So it may even be more spool happy because the height of this is significantly deeper. This is roughly 29, and this almost 24. No, 23. So about 5 millimeters longer. And let's measure where they kind of flatten out near the end. 48.6, slightly smaller. So this thing overall is slightly smaller. It reaches in deeper, just like 0.5 millimeter difference. So how will that affect spoolability? If anything, it may be even more aggressive. Let's see. It seems to be in the right position. This was roughly in between. I don't think this matters too much, but still. Make sure it spins free. Let's take a look from here. You can see we're good. Definitely reaching further in. That's clearing everything fine. Now let's try setting up the wastegate. That looks good. Fits exactly as you would expect. Bring over the inlet. For the first start, I'm going to put some turbo additive. Initial fitting turbocharger additive. You want to put it here, obviously. This is where the oil goes in. And then you can spin the impeller. Let's refresh the O-rings. Tiny bit of silicone grease, just so it doesn't roll over when you're inserting it. refreshing the drain line, pouring, installing fresh manifold gaskets. I'm gonna go ahead and hang the turbo now. I'm gonna go after those two bolts at the bottom, the T45s. Those are the hardest to deal with. To get these two bolts in, you're gonna wanna slacken the bracket that goes on the bottom of the exhaust housing so it can move around and you can line these up and then you can snug it back up. Then we're reinstalling the bolts for the various feed lines. We torque them to 8 Newton meters. So the feed from the coolant pump is being snapped in. It's being braced. It's being screwed at the top of the turbo. We have the oil feed line, which is being screwed into the block. And again, at the top of the turbo, we have the coolant return line screwed in on the block with support. And then at the back into the block, we have the turbo drain line connected and screwed in at the bottom. So we've taken care of all the T30s. We have the two T45s, which were screwed in to the block, and I left the bracket loose and then snugged the bracket up after. All those were 8 Newton meters. These nuts here are going to be 18 Newton meters. And at the bottom, you should do roughly around 25 Newton meters. I wasn't able to find the exact torque spec for those two T45s, but it's not too tight. Now we're converting these lines here. Get that one on there, that one on there, that right there. And snap on the charge pipe. Charge pipe's in, installing the inlet. My new PCV line is now connected on the side. And snap the inlet in. So as you can see, it looks OEM. This clicks in here. This is basically an M340i part anyway. Clicks on just like factory. Wastegate. Slight issue here, this length of this has to be extended to reach to the heater. No big deal because I don't have this code active, so I'm not too concerned about that. I'm gonna let that be. I'll probably just go with the high flow in later on, or we'll see what happens. Not too concerned. So if you have a 2-port non-Supra and you wanna mimic what I did, expect this issue. Harness may be a bit short and you're just probably gonna wanna go with the high flow inlet and just zip tie this off to the side. Time to put coolant into it and do the bleed procedure. I'm going to do the bleed procedure and come back when I'm ready to start it. Okay, so it's the next day. I've put maybe 50 miles on it. I've done a few different trips just around town and whatnot, and I can give you some impressions. This is with an MHD off-the-shelf E40 tune, stage 2. Initially, when I first took it for a drive, it felt a bit softer, under 2,000 RPM and under 10% throttle. And then with time, after a few different trips, it auto-adjusted. So now it feels like it's just as aggressive, if not even more aggressive, or it's getting there. And then that can be dialed in with a tuner regardless, but near as makes no difference. Imperceivable on initial throttle tip in. Mid-range, very spool happy. It feels like an aftermarket turbo, and that's in comfort mode even. On the highway, it feels like it would only want to drop 1 gear instead of 2 when you're giving good throttle tip in. So that tells you it's able to get to its target load cell a little easier with this turbo. So a little more effortless. The car feels lighter in normal driving, and it feels especially lighter at high RPMs. It's not going to blow you away. It just feels like the car's a few hundred pounds lighter at high RPMs. And also, when you're driving aggressive, you get a more aggressive shift wrap between gears because I have this thing set up for OEM-like shifting. So it ultimately feels like it needs to cut more power between gears because it's making more torque. That's at high RPMs. So those are the clues that, okay, since that shift wrap's more aggressive, it's making more torque at high RPMs. And it is more spool happy. Therefore, it feels like it only needs to drop 1 gear when you're on the highway, pushing it a little bit in comfort mode. And, all things considered, it's noticeable with an MHD off-the-shelf tune. I'd imagine it's going to be noticeable with an OEM tune, but it's going to need to adapt. You're going to have to drive on it for a little bit to really maximize it. But since this DME is load-based, it's not going to be able to completely leverage this turbo with a stock tune. Maybe it can a little bit with the off-the-shelf tune. This could be paired well with a JB4 and a lock DME. I can see this being a sweet spot for a lot of people, and it can be really dialed in with a custom tune. So those are my initial impressions. I'm going to follow up with another video where we go to the dyno and we dyno tune it and see what it can make. Thanks for watching.